My name's Caitlin Doris, and I'm here today to tell y'all a little bit about Texas, the Lone Star State. This map is from the Washington Post article titled The Seven Political States of Texas. I thought it was really fascinating, and it was just really indicative of my experiences driving through Texas. I will tell you that I referred to West Texas as oilfield Texas. If you drive through the I-20 out here, it is nothing but oil fields. And North Texas is Windmill Texas. So I just wanted to show you that. I enjoyed it. Today we're going to be learning about demographics, political history, state and national level politics, and go over shortly about some current events. So these demographics, these are important. They tell us about what we think voters are going to vote and how those things line up. They have a pretty hefty population. They have 28.9 million people, 41% white, 40% Latino, 13% Black, 5% Asian, 1% Native American. A vast majority of Texans have a high school diploma, and 29% have a bachelor's degree. And then you can see their household income and their home value. These estimates are from the U.S. Census Bureau 2019. And so in the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you guys some maps of these demographics. So you're going to get to see these, visually. I'm a visual learner, so I like to include those types of things because it helps me make sense of the world, and I want to help you make sense of the world. Because I can tell you demographics all day long, but that doesn't necessarily show you anything about Texas. And especially with Texas, it doesn't show you the specifics of where the urban and the rural places are and how those things align. So in this map on the left, this is from the Census Bureau and from the Texas Demographic Center. It is a map where essentially the green and the light yellow are the young places, and the red, orange are places that are older. They have an older population and younger population. And this on the right is from a New York Times article, Why Texas is Nearing Battleground Status. It's 2018 Senate results. And I liked this map in particular because it wasn't just a blank, red and blue map. It had some light red areas and some light blue areas. So we can see a little bit more information about what people voted versus just Republican majority and Democrat majority. So, and what we can see from these two maps side by side is places that are younger in these metropolitan areas, this place down here in the South, also tend to be more Democratic. But also there are some places over here that are Democratic that are not necessarily younger. They're older. And then there are some places, in this border over here that are younger, not necessarily Democratic, not necessarily liberal, more conservative. So I'll refer to this map frequently. These maps, the data is from 2000, so they're a little dated, but these were the only maps that I could find that had this information that I wanted to show you. So on the left is majority is where whites live, and on the right is where Hispanics live. And so basically the more red, the higher the population. So you can see a lot of the majority of the state has a lot of white people, which is also where there's a lot of Republicans. But on the right here, the places that have more Hispanics tend to be slightly more liberal. And then this is population. We're going to talk about this on the right later in this lecture, but I wanted to show you guys this because this map on the left, albeit not the best map, not the clearest map for you to see, you can gather from this map where there is higher population density. I'm going to just reiterate that a lot because, the divide today between red and blue is between urban and rural. Really, it's not between West Coast and East Coast or South versus North. It's versus urban and rural. So the red places have higher population density. Again, also the places that are more liberal. And then this on the right is from a news article about the 2018 Senate race, which we will discuss, but it also shows the 5 biggest counties how they have 43% of the voters, and how the other 249 counties have 57% of voters. And then these two maps, the one on the left is median household income, and the one on the right is family income. So this just shows you also that, places, these metropolitan areas that have higher income and higher household income are very different from these places, this border of Texas that has a lower income, but still in the elections that voted very similarly. So to give you guys a brief overview of the political history, I'm just going to pick it up from Reconstruction and go to civil rights. From civil rights, we'll talk about the rise of Republicans, which is going to lead us into state politics. So after the Civil War, Texas, like many other places in the South, was very bitter. They were still very distrustworthy of big government. They weakened their governor and their state legislator, and they also tried to keep Democrats in power. And these are the conservative Democrats. These are not the liberal Democrats that we know today. And I want to note that because it's important for you to know. It's important for you to leave this lecture and understand. If you see a news article that says Texas wasn't always Republican, it doesn't mean that they were liberal. They were still conservative. It just means that the party stood for something different. So I just want you guys to really understand that. What I'm talking about here, Democrats, is all conservative Democrats. So in the 1890s, the Democrats that were in power, they ran into a small problem with the rise of populism, very similar to the populist movements across other parts of the South. But, the movement in Texas is significant because it marked the primary divide in Texas politics. And it was different from other places in the South because it was a class-based cleavage that was reinforced by racial antagonism. So it was more about your economic status that was then reinforced by race rather than race reinforced by class or just race-based. And so the most successful way that the Democrats were able to maintain their political control was to implement an all-white Democratic primary and a poll tax. So this populist movement that rose, they were a community that was formed in economic and biracial coalitions. So it was white and black poor people that felt like they were missing out. So this move did two things. The all-white Democratic primary obviously removed the black portion of the movement, and the poll tax removed the white portion because they couldn't pay for the poll tax. And the Democrat rule was successful. This was a move that worked for them politically, and their rule lasted well into the mid-1970s. These are some things that I thought were important to note because it tells us, how long things went on before it changed. In a 1944 Smith v. Allwright case, the Supreme Court ruled against the whites-only Democratic primary. In 1954, Brown v. Board of Education struck down segregation in public schools, but this did not dramatically change Texas. So just because, they got rid of the whites-only Democratic primary, it didn't mean that Republicans came in and won. Conservative Democrats maintained political power until the 1970s, when the party switched, and then they changed to conservative Republicans slowly. I also wanted to note that U.S. Senator Ralph Yarborough was one of few progressive Democrats to have electoral success in the rule of conservative Democrats. So you can imagine it would be difficult to win as a progressive at that point in time. You run on the ticket as Democratic, but the other guy who's also conservative is running on the ticket as Democratic. So I just wanted to note that. And so this leads us straight into the rise of Republicans. Texas first voted for a Republican president in 1950s with Dwight Eisenhower. It was their first major change away from a Democratic majority. And, progressive Democrats, they welcomed this change because they were not happy with a one-party system. They wanted a two-party system, which enabled them to have more influence in the liberal to moderate faction of the Democratic vote. In 1978, the first Texas Republican took the governor position since Reconstruction. Bill Clements won by roughly 16,900 votes. He lost the subsequent election to Mark White, but won the 1986 election. And then this table down here, I wanted to show you guys this table. These are Texas votes for presidents in these presidential elections, and then their party affiliation. So I wanted to note this because it is important to know that, even though they did vote a consecutive amount of Democrats, it wasn't an overwhelming majority. It was 51%. 63% is a strong majority, but Lyndon B. Johnson also was from Texas. So that probably had a part in that. In the 1968 election, they had a independent candidate, George Wallace, who got 19% of the Texas vote. So that's part of the reason why it was so low. But still, it's not an overwhelming majority. And so, Jimmy Carter, still 51%. So we can see that we're starting to change in this point in time. And the Republican Party really cemented themselves in the 1990s. So that's when they really took hold of Texas and didn't let it go. So, and this leads us into state politics. The Texas state government, like many other places in the U.S., has 3 branches under its 1876 Texas Constitution. They have an executive, legislative, and judicial. Their chief executive is the governor, who have term limits to 4 years. The Texas legislature meets every 2 years. They have a House and a Senate with 31 senators and 150 representatives. And they have a judiciary branch. They have a state Supreme Court with 9 members, a Court of Criminal Appeals also with 9 members, and then they have various other lower courts. So within state politics, it's important for us to understand Texans and how they vote, and how things have changed over time. So race and class tend to reinforce each other in Texans' voting behavior. African Americans and Latinos favor Democratic candidates, while whites tend to vote Republican regardless of income. They do it more based on religion than income. In 1994, George W. Bush won the governor seat from incumbent Ann Richards, and the Republicans have had the governor seat ever since. Rick Perry took over in 2000 when Bush was elected president, and he stayed in until he stepped down in 2014, which is when Greg Abbott won the gubernatorial race with over 60% of the vote. He is still the governor today. And also, it's interesting to note that while their governorship has a 4-year term, the number of terms is not limited. There are only 14 states like that. So this leads us right into their national politics. Obviously, they have 2 U.S. senators, John Cornyn and Ted Cruz, both Republican. They have 36 representatives in the House, 22 Republican and 13 Democrats. For all you quick math people, that leaves 1 vacancy. And they have 38 electoral votes. They are a winner-takes-all state. And I wanted to include Texans that became president because not all states get to provide a citizen of theirs to the presidency. So I just wanted to include that. I thought it was important. Lyndon B. Johnson, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush. Dwight Eisenhower, also born in Texas and became president, but he was affiliated with Kansas. And, one of the things about the national politics and the politics of Texas that we have to understand is we have to understand how they have tried to redraw district lines, why they have tried to do that, and how voter ID plays into party politics. So Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act required many southern states to have a preclearance to redraw district maps in order to prevent, basically, racial discrimination. And so since the 1990s, when Republicans took over, they have been trying to redraw maps to gain more political power. They've been in and out of court with these different maps. And in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down the preclearance requirement. So now, in 2021, they will go to redraw the maps again, and they will not have to seek that preclearance requirement. I wanted to include this map because, again, visual, but also just it's interesting to note how they have drawn the maps. So I want to specifically point to this southern part of Texas where they have these 3 different districts and compare it to the map on the right, again, 2018 Senate results map. Just to note, how they have drawn the lines, where they could, maybe instead draw the lines, which would be, just around this very southern tip of Texas, but that would, make that district very Democratic. So, we can see in other areas where, District 23, where they have not broken things up as much. Or, in other districts like 13, where it's just, it's all Republicans. And, a lot of Texas is like that. So I just wanted to include that just so you could compare that and see that as well. Like I said, one of the other things is their voter ID laws. Texas has some of the strictest voter ID laws in the nation. Republicans view this as a common sense approach to combating voter fraud, and Democrats view this as a disenfranchisement mechanism that allows lawmakers to purposefully discriminate against Black and brown people. The Texas ID requirement has been in judicial litigation ever since it was passed in 2011. It's been in and out of court, but in 2018, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down a lower court's ruling. That ruling was that it did not comply with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They struck that down. But one of the things that came out of that court case was that they did change the law. Texas was required to change the law, and now no voter can be turned away without a proper ID. If they forget their ID for whatever reason, they can go to a voting place and they can vote. And also, I just wanted to compare this to the rest of the country. 36 other states have voter ID requirements. Texas is just really strict. So moving right into current events, 2018 Senate race. Again, important to note, not because of who won, but because of how much Cruz won by, and specifically the areas where Beto won. Cruz won by only 3%, and Beto won only 32% of the state's 254 counties. So he won, almost the majority of votes with a very small portion of the state's counties. And so this is, again, an increase to the increase in population in the 4 major areas of Texas. And because of that race, there are lots of people that wonder if Texas could be a swing state in future races, including the 2020 presidential election race. And so this map down here, again, not so you guys can really see this map in great detail, but just so you can see the darker areas are areas where there is an increase in voters, where there's an increase in population. So just wanted to show you that. So speaking of 2020 election, I wanted to discuss with you guys mail-in voting. I think it's pertinent in the middle of a pandemic. And I just wanted to fill you guys in on what Texas is doing. They have not expanded mail-in voting. They've not expanded who's eligible for mail-in voting, but they have expanded early voting. And to show you guys a little bit about, part of why this 2018 race is so important is because the 2020 race, Biden versus Trump, a recent state poll from University of Texas and Texas Tribune found that Trump leads Biden by only 5 points, which is significant because Texas, like Mississippi, has been a ruby red state that Republicans assumed that they would be winning. And the state's independents favor Biden over Trump 45 to 37%. These presidential polls also important because it encourages Democrats down ballot to try to win more districts. And I included this graphic in the bottom also because it matches other national trends, and I wanted to show you guys this, that when you break down who would vote for whom based on gender or based on sex, we can see that men lead the ticket in Texas for Donald Trump, and women lead the ticket for Joe Biden. Also, Senators Cornyn and Cruz have voted to advance Justice nominee Amy Coney Barrett. And coronavirus. Again, I wanted to talk about this. I think it's important. Governor Greg Abbott, he is not requiring masks at polling places. Even though there is a mask mandate that was issued in July, it is still in effect. Texas unemployment rate rose in September to 8.3%. And they recently have had a surge of new cases and hospitalizations. So I wanted to also include this map to show you guys Just briefly, the areas where the new cases are at and how it's not in the urban areas like you might think, like I thought, but it's in the more rural areas because the darker areas are the areas where there are a higher number of new cases. So that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed learning about Texas, about the Lone Star State, and I hope you have walked away from this lecture with a little bit of more knowledge and information about Texas and its political climate. So thanks for listening. Have a good day.